Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to News and Views on Salam Media with Fazlin Franceman Talib. For many of you that do know, today is World Press Freedom Day, which is obviously a significant day, both within the context of journalists in South Africa, but also journalists abroad. And there's a lot of contestation and difficulties, I think, that journalists have to endure in terms of access into information. Firstly, the ability to report stories unhindered and without the interruption or the influence of powers that be, whether it be in the business space, the corporate space, or in the government space. And online, we have a journalist from Eyewitness News, Tshidi Madia, who's going to help us unpack the significance of the day globally, but also locally. Good morning, Tshidi. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good, thank you.
Good. So today's obviously significant within the context of a global initiative. But if we want to just zoom into South Africa, what is the significance of this day within the context of being a journalist locally?
I think when you look at the state of media, we are in this strange space where we are fighting for our existence, if you may, in our country, where ordinary
Mm,
people are increasingly becoming less tolerant of media. And of course, this is in the face of competition in terms of bloggers and the likes, when people have taken the tools to own storytelling. So I think it's significant to remember the importance of the work that we do, an important tenet of democracy. Democracy without free press really isn't democracy. And so I think that in terms of our current context, we're in a precarious position. And I think a day like this is one where we get to highlight the importance of the work that we do. We get to recognize that part of the reason why South Africa is standing by and large is because of the work that the media does. That's important to
mm.
hold leaders accountable. And I think by and large, the media in this country has done an incredible job attempting to play its part in that regard.
Mhm. I want to touch on something that you said. You said that there is a sense of intolerance towards journalists, and intolerance, I think, towards media generally. Where would you see that necessarily taking place or playing out? Is it citizens to the media? Is it government to the media, business to the media? Where does that necessarily play out?
I think it depends on the day. We offend different people for different reasons, which is a good thing. Means we're doing our jobs. But I think what I'm finding is South Africa is a highly politicized country, and I think that politicians spur on their supporters, and what you're finding is that citizens get lost in all of that, and citizens sometimes aren't sure who to trust. I've often watched on
Mhm.
social media, especially where somebody who's lifted content that some hardworking journalists went out to put together is being credited for that work. So you're facing this fierce
Mhm.
competition where people don't credit you, they lift your work, they steal your work, and then they're credited, and then you are rubbish as journalists for doing your job. We also rubbished for our a lot of our analysis on what is happening around us. And I think these are attempts sometimes to bully us, but citizens are part of that and they're influenced by leaders in the different sectors. I think if you look at what's currently playing itself out at the public broadcast of the SABC, where seemingly government is being positioned as a bully of the public broadcaster
Mm.
ahead of the election. So it is a contentious space, but those kind of battles with government, business, citizens, politicians make it very difficult for the press to be believed by citizens. And they themselves seem to get caught in that. And the unfortunate thing is having citizens not believe journalists, because that means that they're not
Mm.
investing in what we're doing, and so you're struggling for your existence with dwindling media houses. So imagine being a newspaper in the face of all of that. Then you're not
Mm.
getting people buying. You face a real
Mm.
possibility of going under. And I think that's a threat that many here locally and abroad face equally.
So I think think you touched on perhaps what the concern is as the for ordinary citizens with regards to journalists. Now, I want to caveat my next question with the fact that, you know, obviously every person, irrespective of who they are, they're influenced by their upbringing, their demographics in terms of their racial makeup, their where they live, all of those things. I think the criticism that citizens generally have, and I know obviously sometimes it's a proxy battle in terms of where people actually, as you said, they act or they're spurred on by leaders. But I think there has to obviously also be an acknowledgement that you know, nobody can ever be truly unbiased within the media space. And how do we balance that? And then I want to juxtapose that to the US. So if in the US, for example, if you turn on CNN, you know you're going to get a certain type of journalism with a certain type of perspective. If you turn on Fox News, you know you're going to get a certain type of perspective. And that is very polarizing. And I feel like for a period of time in South Africa, that was also the case. How do you feel that that plays itself out at the moment, especially in the context of elections?
So I love the US model. I know that it is highly polarized. I think the US is a highly polarized society, but I don't mind tuning into a channel and understanding how a message is carved at all. I prefer that. There was a time where we had 8 and 7, as you make reference to what's happened in our past, and there are a lot of issues around how 8 and 7 was formulated and what was meant to do. But I hardly took issue with 8 and 7. I understood what it represented, and so I was kind of okay with its existence. In terms of how it's playing itself out, you can actually see it too. So in our country, what we have, which is really good, is that there are people who are still willing to be in the middle. In America, you either blue or red, and there's no middle ground. Here, there are people who are on extremes in terms of the media space itself, and then there's the rest of us who are right in the middle, who want to be balanced and fair. And I think you achieve that by going out of your way to give the different sides a hearing. It is really important to do that, even with opinions. It is crucial to to incorporate different opinions into your publication, to allow the listeners, the readers, the users to make up their own minds about what it is that they're seeing. It is highly important to be mindful of that. And I think that's a way to try and avoid it. We are definitely seeing it, particularly in the press space, where one media house almost feels like it's campaigning for a particular leader, or one media house feels like it's campaigning for the removal of a particular leader. That is happening. The turf war does exist because we're also not a homogeneous group, you know, a monolithic group rather. So it is quite interesting to see how it plays itself out. But there are more people willing to be in the middle and to try and hear different sides out. I think where the problem with that lies sometimes is when we fail to remember our own responsibilities, because no matter whose stories you're taking, in their particular standards that we should all be striving to achieve, and in those and in trying to do that, it's also important to counter disinformation and misinformation, because at the height of elections, politicians will say whatever they want to say. You know, former President Jacob Zuma will tell you he's headed back to the union buildings, even though the Constitution serves as a firewall because he's already served 2 terms. There's no third term that's provided for in our Constitution. So if you are just training what he's saying to his supporters, you're also doing your viewers, readers, users such a massive disservice. So you take and you hear everybody, but you do your homework, because you're not a parrot who is just repeating what you're hearing. You've got to apply your mind and what you understand and what is correct and within the law as you cover particular stories.
Mhm. So I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier. You just briefly touched on it, and that's with regards to social media. And obviously, there's a concept of citizen journalism. And yeah, I want to kind of zoom out of South Africa and kind of zoom out, you know, sort of globally. When there's a conflict or there's something happening and journalists cannot be on the ground, very often we lean on people to tell their own stories via social media. And the question really is how does that interplay with journalism within the context specifically of how do you verify, you know, something? Because somebody might honestly be speaking, you know, from their perspective and telling their stories, but that's an individual that is not necessarily or wouldn't necessarily be held to the same standard as if a journalist was reporting it. What is that interplay, I think, and the difficulty then with that emergence?
As you speak, I'm thinking actually about a place like Palestine, where a lot of our colleagues, 104, over 140 journalists, have been affected. So if you're removing the observers, the watchers, those who hold leadership accountable from a conflict zone like Gaza, what we are relying on to find out what is happening, which is highly unfortunate because journalists should be able to be in a space like that and doing their work. We are relying on citizens, we're relying on the Gazans to tell us what are they facing, but you're looking at it from more than one person. So you're able to stitch a picture based on what everyone is using on social media. In fact, it's been a powerful tool when you think about the Middle East conflict in getting the word out on the atrocities that are happening on the ground. So it is important sometimes, citizen journalism, often at university protests, when you are outside, you're relying on what is coming from those universities more often than not, in cases like that where there is conflict, what you are seeing is in real time and you're able to rely on that kind of information. But I also think that there are attempts in the media to strengthen fact checking tools, to look at where else is this being echoed, what is being said about it, is the person credible, are there other media houses picking up on it, what does it mean? So there are ways to check for yourself. But I do think that citizen journalism, particularly in times of conflict where you cannot get journalists in particular areas, is a crucial tool that allows us to still tell the story of a particular place that is important to be amplified, where we have been cut, really. Our pens have been taken from our hands, and you can't amplify what's happening in a particular environment. What's often come in what's become quite handy has been that the Columbus University protests in the US, again, they're not necessarily allowing every journalist within their vicinity. Some journalists, I think a South African journalist said that they were allowed entrance, and you understand it's because of our own positioning on the Middle East conflict. But until you're able to access that particular venue, what you are relying on are the multitudes of people within that space who are showing you the different pictures and images and videos of what is taking place.
We're chatting to Tshidi, who's unpacking for us World Press Freedom Day. Tshidi, I want to touch on AI because I think it's a growing challenge that is probably going to get become an even bigger challenge, in the next few months and probably years. And I specifically want to highlight a particular incident that we saw, I think, a month or two ago in England, specifically, where you had the royal family put out a photo that had been doctored. And obviously, the response from Associated Press and other journalists obviously was immediately to pull it. But obviously the starting line was that it was published. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that we know that we have things like ChatGPT that makes life generally a lot easier. But how do you separate something that has been written by Fazlin versus something that has been written by ChatGPT with your input? And I think this becomes obviously a challenge for journalism and journalists generally, because how do you how do we know that this is Tshidi that is putting this information forward, or whether this is AI generated, but then obviously you are taking the credit for that by having your name on that. So that's the written side, and then obviously there's the doctored imaging, which I think is a huge challenge, and it's becoming something that is a bit of a question mark in terms of people having to question legitimacy of things.
I think on the image side, I think that the onus is on us to do our homework, to be more, to be just to scrutinize better. I did an Africa Check workshop not too long ago, and it is about looking at an image and trying to figure out what aspects of the image tell you and whether or not the image makes sense. I mean, part of the image in the training had an EFS march, and it said it was a march from about a week ago. And I remember saying to them, no, I actually remember that march very well because I remember seeing ABCDE. So you need to look for pointers that affirm and confirm particular things in an image in terms of imaging. But again, it's down to training. So the training that needs to be done by the media to adapt is quite crucial to help journalists figure out what to look out for, so that you don't make the mistake of publishing an image like that of Prince William and his family, Princess Kate, yes, and her
Yeah,
family.
yeah.
Um, and in terms of the written word, I think what is always what technology can never do is replace the essence of human touch in journalism, in what we do. And no matter who says it will erase human journalists, it's very hard to do so, because there's nuance that can only exist based on person to person contact when you are doing storytelling. I mean, there's even a fair argument to make that if you are doing a telephonic interview, it's so different from when you are in a studio with somebody, um,
Mm,
because the human essence of the conversation trickles into it, context falls into place, tonality is a factor, and those are things that technology has not been able to emulate. What's also interesting for me with with this AI technology is that during elections you're seeing Eminem videos supporting particular political parties, and you need to again pause and think about how feasible is it, how plausible is it that Eminem would be out supporting some random political party in South Africa when he doesn't even have views on American politics. It
mm,
makes no sense. So you do need to
mm.
scrutinize the content quite thoroughly before passing it on. And where you are able to verify, my goodness, make the call and verify as quickly as possible.
Mhm.
So you need to
I
remember how
want
you
to,
actually take it.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. I want to, sort of touch on a concern that a lot of citizens have with regards to who's paying for what with regards to journalism, right? We know, and I'm going to use the American example, but I'd like the answer obviously to be South African based. Obviously, in America, we know the Murdoch family. They, own Fox News and a whole lot of other, kind of media outlets. And so people ask the question around, sort of the influence of individuals or companies into the media space, and whether or not that actually influences the authenticity of what is being presented to the citizenry. Because at the end of the day, and I said this many years ago, that you have information and then you have the people, and the medium that connects information to the people is journalism, is the journalist. And sometimes, that information is presented in such a crude or difficult way. Journalists' job is also to make it understandable for people to be able to be palatable. And now the question comes is, if that information is being sort of pushed from a particular angle because of who owns what. I want to know whether you think that is a factor in South Africa, both in election time, but just generally speaking.
I think there should be clear lines between ownership and commercial, rather, and editorial. It's a very difficult relationship between the two, because most of us are working for companies that are actually not just noble media houses working for free. They are businesses that we serve. But the commercial interests, no matter what they are, should not be utilized to influence editorial. I think over the past few years, I've watched it be a push and pull relationship. But I've also watched in South Africa people hold the line, and I will use the Middle East conflict, because there's a lot of conflict around some media houses that have advertising from companies aligned to the Jewish Board of Deputies, and they have presenters who must speak on issues in the Middle East, must make sense of what they see, and I'm yet to see in our space, at least, a heavy influence. I've seen a backlash from presenters who speak about those things, but I'm yet to see an actual interference where a manager will say, "Don't do this," or "Don't question this or that." That would be it would be breaking a sacrosanct rule about what editorial's
Mm,
job is to do. I mean, I often speak to one of our CEOs, and I always say to him, you know, I'm not bothered with so and so or whatever. If they ask me about politics, I'm like, I'm not bothered. But anyway, even if they need to advertise, because political parties around elections advertise, and I say I'm not bothered that They need to advertise with the company. It doesn't influence what I do or say about them, because that's not my purview. That's not my space. And what concerns they have about what we do in the editorial space, if they share them with the business, that's really, it might be raised here and there, but it's really neither here nor there. It has no business influencing how we work. So in South Africa, I think by and
Mm,
large there is a tension, but I do think that in terms of commercial interests, I think they've done a fairly good job of trying to keep
mm,
those away from editorial spaces. Sometimes I don't think we get it right across the board, and sometimes our government doesn't get it right as far as the public broadcaster is concerned. But by and large, there's space given to journalists to do their work.
mhm. And final question, Tshidi, and it's with regards to a statement that I think is very profound, but I think is a sentiment that any person that lives within a democracy understands, and that is that there is no democracy without a free press, and that the free press, sort of is critical to one holding government accountable, but to just communicating, the facts. We have seen over the years, sort of whistleblowers, and protection of that, both within the media space, but then obviously also, within employ, whether it is in government or in business. Charting forward, how do you think that will look for South Africa within the context of our democracy? Do you think that we are more free from a press perspective now than we were 30 years ago when we entered our democracy? Or do you think that there has been a regression? What is your projection specifically for this space?
I think South Africa's media remains free in a very loud democracy. It remains able to call out leadership. It's not fearful of its leaders. And I truly hope that's a spirit we retain as a country. I've traveled quite extensively, and I'm always surprised at how scared journalists in the continent and outside of this continent are scared of their leaders, scared to ask them questions,
Mm,
to take them head on. We might struggle with our president in terms of availing himself, but goodness, we will tell him what we think and not blink and not think twice about his failures or his successes, his government's failures or successes for that fact. Will not blink when it comes to the opposition. I cover politics. It is it's an incredibly difficult space. I can imagine that investigative journalism is also hard, uh, because people try and cover up what they've done wrong. But I do think that when you watch the fight to continue doing right by citizens and doing our work, we are on the right side, and often we come up on top. When you look at fights for access to information, in some regards, there are things that are difficult, have been growing difficult, but by and large, we definitely are freer than we were 30 years ago, and we play our role. We actually do take our role seriously as the media, and we play it in helping to keep democracy rooted and growing in our country.
mhm. That was Tshidi Madia from Eyewitness News, who's been unpacking with us the importance of World Press Freedom Day, and also just, generally the context of working in the media space within the context of South Africa, and the challenges that are faced within that